Good evening. Welcome to another night here on Spirit Connections. I'm Tiffany Rice, Spirit Medium.
And I am Stephanie Burke, Spirit Medium.
And tonight we have our guest, Aaron Gatju. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
For those of you guys who don't know who Aaron is, he is one of the co-directors of the new, well, I should say old, but it's going to be new, the Bridgewater Triangle documentary.
That's correct.
Coming out October 20th, right?
That's correct. At UMass Dartmouth.
So excited about it.
Yeah, there's quite a buzz surrounding the film. It's been about 3 years in the making, so, the Bridgewater Triangle tends to be a very popular topic in the paranormal community, so there's a lot of people that have bought tickets and a lot of people that are excited to go.
It's so funny because Stephanie and I do a lot of walkthroughs in houses, and so many times people will say, "Have you girls heard of the Bridgewater Triangle?"
Yeah.
And we'll say, "Yep." I grew up in Bridgewater, so I was right in the heart of the Hockomock Swamp and all that good stuff. So I'm so excited to have you on because I personally have a lot of questions and want to know where you've been and where you got your information and all that good stuff. So
you want me to ask questions now?
Okay. Or
I also like to point out that you are fantastic at butchering people's last names.
Gatju.
You nailed that, yeah.
Yeah, Gatju.
You said Gatju.
I said Gatju, but I meant Gatju.
There has to be a bug, right?
Yeah.
So before we begin with everything.
Ooh, Miyagi.
Oh, we like
We
you.
need,
We're going to keep you.
Tissue now, please.
Before we get into everything to do with the Bridgewater Triangle, we want to highlight you a little bit. So do you want to tell us about your background, who you are, where you came from?
I'm born and raised in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. I went to Dartmouth High School, of course.
Dartmouth.
Did the Dartmouth Community Television program in high school. I always kind of knew that I wanted to be, video production, documentary filmmaking. Went to Fitchburg State College for Communications with a concentration in video production. Graduated in 2005 and have worked, for advertising agencies. I've been and that whole time I've been running my own business, and just this May I went freelance on a full-time basis.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Congratulations.
So self-employed.
So aren't we all?
So we are.
That's what we
We
are
both
too.
are too. Where did your love of film come from?
I don't really know where it came from. I just, as a kid in the neighborhood, we were always, taking a video camera and making stupid movies in the, people's backyards and stuff like that.
Yep.
And did little claymation movies and all that kind of stuff that you hear about,
awesome.
filmmakers doing as kids.
That's really cool. Where did the fascination with the Bridgewater Triangle begin?
I was surfing the web one night looking at topics for a possible documentary, and I love Halloween. It's my absolute favorite holiday. So yeah, I think anybody in this field is drawn to Halloween. So I was researching Spidergate Cemetery up in Worcester. As I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Maybe that would be a good documentary topic. And somehow in that search, I came across Chris Pittman's section on the Bridgewater Triangle on his website, Cellar Walls. And I was like, this Bridgewater Triangle. I started reading about all the different locations and all the different anomalies that are within the Bridgewater Triangle, and I thought, this is great. I said, there's all these different elements. It's a local topic. It's accessible. And that was back in 2003. So in college, I did a little half-hour documentary on the Bridgewater Triangle, which ended up being like a cult classic, only because I never anticipated it to be anything more than just a practice film. And when I finished it, I used copyrighted music, copyrighted images. I couldn't sell it. I gave it to a friend, and then he gave it to a friend, and then they gave it to a friend, and then all of a sudden I was getting phone calls from people saying, where can I buy a copy of this movie? And I was like, I can't sell it. I don't own the rights to it. So in the back of my mind, I was always like, if I'm ever going to redo a real feature-length documentary, the Bridgewater Triangle would be a great topic. So fast forward to 2009, 2010, I started laying the groundwork to do the documentary. And I found out that Manny Familare was also working on a Bridgewater Triangle documentary.
I'm glad Manny's not here, because that's a name I probably would definitely butcher. I was like, wow, I was not pronouncing it that way.
We have people that come on constantly that she says their last name different constantly, and it's awesome.
Because I get nervous. When the camera's on, I'm like, and
well, it's never something easy, just like Smith or Jones. It's,
it's always something crazy.
I grew up with.
Actually, in the opening credits, it says a Káju Familare film.
Yep.
People that don't know us are going to be like a Kadayaks Familare.
I love it.
They're going to totally mess it up.
Familare.
I was saying, I don't even want to say. I was saying Falamar.
Awesome.
Yeah,
like
that's when I first started reading his name, that's what I thought it was too. So
that's great.
Don't blame you there.
We like to have fun on the show. We're totally not serious.
That's fine. Neither am I. So to make a long story short, we joined forces and we started working together in 2010, and here we are today.
Awesome.
Excellent. And I just, especially through social media, I've been hearing so much about this film, even before, because I know Manny has had a Facebook page, the Bridgewater Triangle, so he's been kind of documenting everything that's been going on throughout the years. And it's funny because you guys actually had the privilege of, well, I don't know if you want to call it privilege or not, but you ended up meeting a lot of our I don't want to call them co-workers, but colleagues, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
everybody's been fantastic. And I like this project because the cast of people that are involved is so long, and it's so many people that have done a lot of work in the Bridgewater Triangle area, and it's a good way for all of those people to be recognized for the work that they're doing.
Right.
And you know, the paranormal community can sometimes be a little, and this is from an outsider's perspective because I'm not a paranormal
We
researcher.
probably have the same one. But
Yeah, it can be, sometimes there's hard feelings and there's backstabbing and
Yes.
all that kind of stuff.
Drama.
Yeah,
Yes.
drama to beat the band, but this project has been nice in that, you know, people that may have had drama with each other in the past have been able to just kind of set it aside and all
Right.
contribute to this one cohesive piece on the Bridgewater Triangle. And we're hoping that when people think of the Bridgewater Triangle, this film will be one of the first things that comes to mind.
that's really cool.
Now, there's so many different areas of the Bridgewater Triangle that I feel like a lot of people don't even know about. Again, growing up in Bridgewater, I'm familiar with the Indian Rock Bridge, which is right near the Lake Nippatucket, which they call the Nip.
Yep.
Which is part of the Triangle area. And actually, Spooky South Coast, they used to, I don't know if they did it this year or not.
I don't think we did it. It's usually
The investigation show?
Yeah, the investigation
It's going
show.
to be, according to Tim Weisberg, that show is going to take place the night before the premiere.
All right, because I was going to say
Oh.
it's normally August, September.
Right.
So it'll be a little colder
Because I
this
remember
year.
hanging out at the Indian Rock
Yep.
Bridge a couple years ago, late at night. So that was an experience. So we've heard of lights being shown, like almost like plane lights being shown, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, big birds, huge dogs, vicious dogs. And of course, we have the Freetown State Forest, which is a whole other level of cults
Yay.
and so forth. So with everything that, you know, you did research on, is there one that personally interests you, or?
Because I'm skeptical in nature when it comes to a lot of this stuff, I'm drawn to the true crime stuff in the Freetown State Forest. That's probably my favorite topic when talking about the Bridgewater Triangle. You know, the Hockomock Swamp is pretty interesting too because so many stories have come out of there.
Right.
But I'm drawn to the Freetown State Forest, maybe because I grew up 8 miles down the road from there as a kid.
Right.
Right.
So that could have something to do with it. But yeah, I
think
find
we
that
all, like,
fascinating.
I grew up in North End, New Bedford, and I live in Acushnet now, but I think every kid that grew up in this area, it's like Profile Rock. Everything was Profile Rock. You go, like, as a child, you go on a field trip, anything. So Freetown State Forest is kind of one of those places that are just like a staple in your childhood, especially around the time like you and I grew up. So
Sure.
I hated going there as a child. I could not stand it. It scared the
I still
crap out
haven't
of me.
been.
Really?
Yeah.
You've never been?
We should take a field trip. You can bring me there, which I know you don't like going in, but I'll go, and then I'll bring
I
you to
don't,
the
but I
Indian Rock
think
Bridge, and
Part of it is
We'll get a canoe
part of
on
it is
the
the
nip.
paranormal aspect, but the other part is, like you said, the true crime
True
stuff
crime.
that's actually happened there. Like, you don't realize how dark and scary and like a big black hole it really is. So
I think it's improved through the years. They haven't really had much in terms of true crime in the last decade or so.
Yeah.
But back 70s, 80s, 90s,
it was bad.
there was a lot of
Yep.
strange stuff going on there, for
Yep.
sure.
So it definitely not one of my favorite places.
Well, one thing about the Bridgewater Triangle that, for people that don't live in Massachusetts, it's kind of a misconception about it, where people think that the Hockomock Swamp makes up the entire Bridgewater Triangle. They think that, you know, there's actually false information that there's the Grassy Island Burial Ground, which is located across the Taunton River from the Dighton Rock State Park, which is actually in Berkeley. That's another misnomer. The Dighton Rock is not in Dighton, it's in Berkeley. And this Grassy Island Burial Ground, which is right down the river from there, for a long time, everybody was saying that that was in the Hockomock Swamp, and it's not anywhere close to the Hockomock Swamp. It's like 20 miles to the south of the Hockomock Swamp. So the Bridgewater Triangle is a 200 square mile region, and the Hockomock Swamp only makes up a small portion of it. And then the Freetown State Forest kind of anchors it in the bottom corner. So it's bigger. It's 200 square miles, and it's not just the Hockomock Swamp. That's kind of, I think, a misconception about the triangle.
I think there's a lot, and I've seen, especially over the years, like kids, you know, whether it be on Facebook or forums, like, oh, let's go to the Bridgewater Triangle tonight. I think they actually think that Bridgewater Triangle is just a specific place, but it's actually a very wide region that covers quite a bit of space, and they don't realize it.
Abington, right? Abington,
Yep.
Abington at the northern
like
point,
goes,
yeah.
Yep.
That's where the big dog was.
And that's why I think
Right.
Abington is the northern apex of the triangle. And I think that the Bridgewater Triangle is like, it's defined by the boundaries that Lauren Coleman originally had given the triangle, but that's often disputed. And there's questions of, is it even a triangle? Is it a blob? Is it just southeastern Massachusetts that's a hot spot? Or is there really nothing significant about the Bridgewater Triangle at all, in that it's only because we have a heightened awareness here because of the triangle that we're more apt to notice things. So these are all things that we talk about in the film as well. The film attacks the subject matter from a very journalistic standpoint. We don't, anything that we wrote, which is anything that you hear from the off-screen narrator, is very matter of fact. We use a lot of words like reportedly, allegedly, as the story goes, that kind of language. We're not trying to present any of this as undisputable fact, or indisputable fact, I should say. We let the eyewitness first-hand accounts tell their stories, let the experts give their testimony, and then it's up to the viewer to make their determinations.
Which I think is really important.
Based on the information that we're providing.
A lot of the shows that are out there right now covering anything to do with the paranormal, or, you know, different, I mean, even like look at like politics, everything like sways you in one direction and tries to make you believe, and it's almost like a brainwashing type of thing. But when you give people a choice and you give them an option, or you give them even two options, I think that's really important, because you're getting down to like a deeper feeling or a deeper meaning into the actual subject matter.
And especially in this area, I think I'd sent you an email. I did a house gathering in Halifax, and I had brought up the show that I do, and I had mentioned the Bridgewater Triangle, and they were so excited. They're like, we're going to see it, we're going to see it. And so it just took me by surprise, but at the same time, the house that I was at, it was a historian, so he was very familiar with the area, and they're so excited for this premiere to be happening. So I'm glad that you guys were able to put it together.
Yeah, it's like I said, I've been having trouble sleeping at night. I mean, I'm working on the always making tweaks to it, and making sure the sound levels are all in place. And generally, I don't finish that till about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then by the time I actually fall asleep, it's usually pushing 3 o'clock in the morning. It takes me that long to calm down, and I just have the premiere running through my head, and how is it going to go, and is everything going to run smoothly, and what's the reaction going to be, and I'm looking forward to it finally being seen and taking a little bit of that pressure off.
Well, I think another thing too is that it already has a name for itself. So it's maybe to a select few, it might be their first time hearing about it, but it's so saturated in this area that it already has that name. And I think that's why people have that curiosity factor. Oh, tell us more. What else? What else did people say? Oh, you have eyewitnesses? Okay, let's hear it. And I think that's great.
I think the majority of what's in there too, though, is going to shock the people that might know one part of it or this part of it, but they don't know everything together. So I think it's going to be exciting.
Exactly, and the other thing that makes it exciting is there's something in there for everybody.
Right.
If you're a ufologist but you don't necessarily believe in ghosts, we have UFO stuff in there. If you're a cryptozoologist and you don't necessarily believe in UFOs or ghosts, we have cryptid animal stuff in there. So, and also, if you're a total skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, there's the true crime aspects of the Freetown State Forest.
Right.
So there's something in there for everybody, whether, and if you're not into one part of the film, the next section that comes up might really draw you in and might, get people excited.
It's like me, I don't do the aliens or the Bigfoot. I'm not into that. It scares the crap out of me. I think it's a good time to play the trailer.
I was just going to say, can we play? Whoops. Oh, that was my phone.
Okay,
I always
so
drop
Tiff's
something,
destroying
so
things,
okay.
but Matt, can you roll a trailer for us, please? Take my glasses off.
I've been studying cryptozoology for 52 years. I started picking up on this whole notion that there was an area that was a magnet of weird phenomena. I think that we've got something very unique going on in the Bridgewater Hockomock area that we should at least acknowledge.
Whatever it is, we keep talking about this region for some reason. I certainly think that the Hockomock Swamp serves as the epicenter of activity in the Bridgewater Triangle.
I saw something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life.
I saw what appeared to be the Sasquatch creature that I heard about.
Off in the distance was an extremely large, man-like creature.
I pulled over the Rainham dog track parking lot. I'm right under this orb as it's birthing these ships. What I seen was definitely not from this world.
A lot of criminal cult activity happened in the Freetown State Forest.
We had evidence that a ritual was taking place in the state forest. And there was a huge amount of calves with the absence of blood.
Legends and stories about the Bridgewater Triangle will never stop. Nobody can argue that there isn't something very special about this area.
I don't believe in the Bridgewater Triangle. I accept it.
You have Mr. Lauren Coleman himself.
Yep, we were lucky enough to get him in the film, which I think is important.
Really cool.
I had the pleasure of meeting him, I think, back in 2010, the same time I met John Horgan, who narrates it. They were running a paranormal conference of some sort, and it was really interesting talking to him and meeting him, and because his name has that legend iconic ring to it.
So I have to ask, being a hardcore skeptic, what was it like to go to all these different places, or to film all these different things, or to hear all these stories? Did it sway your beliefs a little bit? Did you witness anything that might have changed it?
One story in particular. Well, I should say there were two, and I'm not gonna, one of them I don't want to give too much away because it's probably the most intriguing story in the film, and we want to kind of save it for people to see. But it was a gentleman who had a bizarre creature sighting in Rainham, just south of the Hockomock Swamp. And he saw this creature, and when he tells his story, he was out walking his dog, and he just comes across as so credible and so likable that you think to yourself, how could this guy be lying? And the guy actually waited 20 years to tell his story. He sat on it for 20 years because he figured, you know, this could affect my livelihood. People might not think of me the same way. So he waited till he retired. And he has a blog online, and he wrote about it in his blog. And the only reason we found him was one, you know, I'm always Googling Bridgewater Triangle terms just to see what the latest stuff out there is. And I came across his blog. It was called an eerie encounter with a midnight encounter with an eerie swamp creature. Found it, contacted him, and he said he would be more than willing to do an interview. So we went and interviewed him. And actually, he's going to be featured on the Discovery Channel later in 2014 for that same creature encounter. And the only reason that the Discovery Channel found him was because we found him. Because we listened to his story and said, you know, this story sounds like it could be X, Y, or Z. And then he updated his blog to say that he was going to be in the documentary, and that it was brought to his attention that his sighting could be this. And so then Discovery Channel found it based on that and got in touch with him. So yeah, it's kind of exciting that they're kind of coming on the heels of this this project. That's the rumor, that he possibly saw a Pukwudgie. I will say that. Yep. And the Discovery Channel is going to be doing a special on Pukwudgie sightings, and so they want to talk to him.
Very interesting. I've met a few in my travels. They're interesting.
And I just love the name Pukwudgie because it just sounds like a little nugget that you want to just hold.
No, you don't.
Yeah, I know it's supposed to be kind of vicious, but
No, you don't.
at the same time.
It's funny that you do say that too with this particular story. It's not really your typical paranormal story. It's not like, oh, I saw a ghost, or oh, I had a ghostly encounter. So it's interesting that that's actually what kind of rattled you a little bit, made you think twice.
Yeah,
so,
and just because, like I said, he comes across as so credible and so honest and so endearing.
Yeah.
He seems like, you know, he just seems like he could be like your grandfather, that kind of a guy, very, you know, caring guy. Yep, exactly. So really it was really, you know, kind of sent a chill down your spine when he told his story. And the other story that we covered, which is really interesting, is probably the most famous UFO sighting to occur in the Bridgewater Triangle, which was a sighting by two WHDH news reporters, Jerry Lopes and Steve Sprazier, who in 1979 saw a large home plate-shaped object flying very low in the sky in Bridgewater. And it was probably about the size of, according to Steve Sprazier, he said it was about the size of 3 747s stacked wing to wing, so that's quite a large object.
Right. Huge.
And then the interesting thing is, the Brockton Enterprise ran an article at that time that people all across southeastern Massachusetts were having these sightings. And so we interview Jerry Lopes and Steve Sprazier, and we also interview a third gentleman who also claimed to have seen this same object in the sky at a different location in the Bridgewater Triangle. So that one is very interesting.
UFOs.
Yes.
Probably the most paranormal you can get out of the paranormal is, I think, cryptozoology and UFO, anything. Usually it's easy to, persuade someone that ghosts are real or, what we do is real. But getting into aliens or Bigfoot, I try to stay away from that. Aliens scare the crap out of me. Everybody makes fun of me for it, but it's not my thing.
I've never had an alien experience, at least to my knowledge, I've never had an alien experience.
So I think that's probably the toughest thing to convince us of is aliens and
or like Bigfoot. I want to see Bigfoot.
You'd probably
I want to be
friends.
bait. I want to, I want to.
Well, we have two eyewitness accounts of Bigfoot encounters in the film, and then a third of a gentleman who passed away. So
any located in Bridgewater itself, or
well, one of the sightings was in Bridgewater at a location called Claybanks Pond. That was a sighting by Mr. Joseph DeAndrade, who's probably one of the most recognizable names with Bigfoot encounters in the Bridgewater area. The other one was by a gentleman named John Baker, who was a trapper on the Hockomock Swamp. And that's actually one of the clips that we have for you guys to play.
Okay. I love these clips.
And the third one was by a gentleman named Carlson Woods, who's actually does a lot involved in the paranormal. But he claims to have had a sighting of Bigfoot when he was a child playing out in the Hockomock Swamp.
So you just mentioned the clip, so it's probably a good time to tell us a little bit about it, and then we can play it.
Sure. This is a scene from the Bridgewater Triangle documentary of a gentleman named John Baker, who has since passed away, who was featured in a Boston Herald article by a guy named Ed Hayward. And it talks about his encounter with a Bigfoot creature in the middle of the night while trapping out on the Hockomock Swamp. And it's it's probably one of the creepier scenes from the movie, and we wanted to kind of release it as a little bit of a teaser, just so people can see the kind of quality of the film and the kind of the feel of it. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting, and we have quotes from the article read by the article's author, Ed Hayward. So this is not Baker's voice that you're hearing because he passed away, but it's the guy who wrote the article.
Okay.
So
all right,
you can let it play. It speaks
all
for
right,
itself.
Let's go.
In addition to Joseph DeAndrade, deceased West Bridgewater resident John Baker reported his own Bigfoot sighting while fur trapping in the Hockomock Swamp in the early 1980s. A Boston Herald article featured an interview with Baker concerning his encounter. The following are direct quotes from Baker, read by the article's author, Ed Hayward.
Something was following me, and I knew it was big. So I took the boat down a small creek to a dry hill, and it kept moving. I knew it wasn't a human because when it passed by me, I could smell it. It smelled like skunk, musty and dirty, like it lived in the dirt. My heart was up in my throat. To this day, I don't know what it was, but I know I saw it, and it was out there.
I love how the camera catches us and we're just looking up like, go on, we want more?
We want to see the whole thing now. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about running into Bigfoot in the dark.
I'd be very, very curious. I had an experience when I was in Bridgewater and I was playing in the woods. It wasn't near the Hockomock Swamp, but it was more towards the downtown area of Bridgewater, and I was in the woods. And I swear I saw something much bigger than a dog, because I can remember looking at it and it was big and black, and it was huge. And at the time I had all the World Wildlife Federation cards, because I love animals, we all know that. So I remember I got home and I went through my whole index of the cards, like, I gotta find it. And I swear to you, it wasn't a dog. I didn't know if it was an ape. It was just this very weird animal. And maybe it was because I was 11 and 12. I didn't follow through with it, but...
was it a large creature? How long did you see it?
Well, it was staring at me and I was staring at it. And it looked like it was just sitting down, like sitting on its hind legs like this, and it was all black. And I can tell you it wasn't a dog. I know it wasn't a dog. But, yeah, I never really talked about it. And
well, it's interesting.
It wasn't...
One of the stories that comes out of there was back in, this is way before that, obviously, but back in 1970, there was a joint local police and state police expedition into the Bridgewater area to find this bear that people were seeing. And the reports were that the bear was standing upright and walking on his hind legs. And there's a story featured in Lauren Coleman's book and in other sources that a police officer was sitting in his cruiser, and this bear came up behind the cruiser and lifted it right off of its rear wheels and put it back down. And the officer claims that it was not a bear, that it was in fact a Bigfoot creature, and that's one of the disputes about that whole account, because bears have kind of been not seen in southeastern Massachusetts for a long time. They're just now starting to make their way back down to the Taunton and Attleboro area, but black bears have been out of this region for quite a while. And you know, back in the 1970s, there were no black bears down in this area, so it's kind of an interesting story.
And a dog, I'm still on the dog kick. A bear wouldn't pick up a.
Yeah, there's. I mean,
how could it?
Or why?
It has no thumbs, you know.
And that's tough for any type of law enforcement to come out and kind of say something like that happened, because it puts their whole job at risk.
Sure.
So, you know, open to ridicule and everything else, or psychological evaluation. So, that can't be easy.
Were you able to get certain police reports from Bridgewater and the surrounding
There wasn't
areas?
much for that case. Lauren Coleman talks about it, and that's pretty much where we leave it, because it was back in 1970, so there's not a lot of reports still from that time, and the police departments turned over so many times that we had trouble finding anybody that was around back then that could have talked about it. But we do talk about another case in Mansfield, which I don't remember the year off the top of my head. It was a Thunderbird sighting.
Yes.
By a police officer. Norton Police Sergeant named Thomas Downey saw this large bird in the skies above Mansfield. And he's been approached many times for interviews by authors and people that are doing pieces on the Bridgewater Triangle, and he always refuses, but he does say that he stands by his story, but he will not talk about it.
Well, again, like Steph said, you know, you do have the hardcore skeptics that would, instead of just listening, would probably ridicule. And a lot of people don't want to put themselves out in the fear of being ridiculed, especially in the public eye.
I think some of the more intriguing stories are ones that are by people that want to remain anonymous.
Right.
That says a lot about the credibility of a story.
Does,
If somebody's
absolutely.
not seeking publicity for the account but says that they stand by this story, it holds more water a lot of times than somebody who comes out and says, yes, I saw this creature, and
it does.
You know, it chased me through the woods. And
I think that's also common too, especially in the paranormal field. People are always out there with a new story or a new ability or, you know, anything like that, trying to get publicity, trying to be on the next Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures, and it's really hard. Like, we meet a lot of people that, you know, seem nice at first and then end up trying to either use you or, you know, to get somewhere or to make money, and it's a little crazy. I'm sure you guys probably came across a few people that wanted to be part of the film, or, you know, tried to push their way into the film, or tried to say like, hey, look at me.
I
Came with
found
their
that
cloak.
the most frustrating, the most frustrating witnesses that really would have wanted to be in the film, but we had to kind of step back and say, was where you would talk about every phenomenon that's occurred in the Bridgewater Triangle, and they said, well, I saw the Bigfoot creature, and then I saw the UFO, and then I saw the giant cat, then I saw the giant dog, and then I saw a ghost, and then it's like, really, you saw every single one of these phenomenon within your lifetime. So, you know, those are the kind of people, it's like, whereas like this gentleman who saw this creature that I was talking about before, he had no knowledge of the existence of the concept of this Bridgewater Triangle until after he saw his creature. Well, so that was really intriguing.
Right. It's just like in paranormal stuff, and I hear it all the time. I got scratched. I got kicked. I saw a full body apparition.
Every time you leave the house.
Right. Like
it
there's
happens.
always something. I do want to remind you guys that for those of you guys that are just tuning in, we have Erin Cadieux on, co-director of the Bridgewater Triangle documentary. If you guys want to give us a call and ask Erin a question, you can call us at 781-281-8433, or you can log in to SpookySouthCoast.com for all you Wareham residents, SpookySouthCoast.com/SpookyTV, and you can get into the chat room and ask your questions there. So just want to remind you guys.
You're the queen of random.
Well, no, because I know it's like halfway through the show, and it's good to remind people.
There was like a long run-on sentence out of a former statement.
Hit play and just go.
You're funny. Yeah, we deal with it all the time. Even people that, you know, try to push themselves onto us. Like, we had this, we had that, or, you know, we hear these stories and it's like, there's no way. Like, I grew up in a house that was built in 1792. It was part of the Underground Railroad. It was constant activity, but I didn't know what I was dealing with. I didn't know, like, I would be the kid that would go to the library to look up books to try to see what I was dealing with, or like try to understand it, and I did a lot of reading. But nowadays you just gotta punch something into Google and all of a sudden you have a story that it can sell you on television.
Absolutely. Now that makes me think of a question. Have you guys ever talked to, I know you're a skeptic, but have you ever talked to a medium, a spirit medium, or has anybody tried to approach you to see if they could go out into parts of the Bridgewater Triangle with you?
Well, one of the things about this film, and the answer to that is no, but one of the things about this film that people probably don't understand or don't realize is that this is not really a boots-on-the-ground documentary. We weren't doing live recordings of ourselves going in through the woods, into the Hockomock Swamp, into the Freetown State Forest. It was more, this film is more of a historical look at the Bridgewater Triangle.
Just making people aware.
Exactly, and we feature eyewitness accounts, and a lot of times if we didn't have any, we weren't there at the time obviously for these things, so the visual elements are made up of a combination of newspaper clippings, hand-drawn original illustrations by some artists, and limited number of reenactments. We tried not to go too heavy with the reenactments because it can come across as very cheesy and hokey. So we tried to be very careful with that. But that's one of the reasons why we never went into any of these locations with a spiritual medium or anything like that. Only because it wasn't that style of a film. I wouldn't have been opposed to it, and there are some interesting stories that we've heard from the Bridgewater Triangle that involve psychics and spirit mediums and things like that, but we didn't come across any.
Good to know. Good to know.
We have to ask.
Yeah, no,
I know. We have to ask that with every show because we're so curious. Because Steph and I, this is what we do. This is what we do all full time. So we're constantly going into locations, and we work with historical societies that bring us in, and we do walkthroughs. And
I guess this is a good place to segue into this, and we might be able to segue into our next clip. We talk about the Freetown State Forest extensively in the film. And we talked to former Freetown Police Detective Alan Alves, who was involved in a lot of the investigations in the Freetown State Forest regarding cult activity. And he also was involved in a number of other strange cases in the Freetown State Forest, just because that seems to be just a magnet for strange things.
Yes, it is.
And he, in addition to being involved with the cult stuff, was the first officer on the scene for the discovery of Mary Lou Arruda's remains in the Freetown State Forest. Now that's one of the more high-profile cases where a 15-year-old girl from Raynham named Mary Lou Arruda was riding her bike, was kidnapped by a guy named James Cater. She was taken to the Freetown State Forest, tied to a tree, raped, murdered, and left for dead. And her body was discovered in November of 1978 by a couple of dirt bike riders, who then called it into the police. And of course, Alan Alves, Mr. Freetown State Forest, is the first guy on the scene. And when they started to investigate that case, he actually brought a psychic in to see if they could find any leads for the case. And this was in 1978, so this was just prior to them starting to discover a lot of the satanic evidence of satanic activity and cult activity in the Freetown State Forest. So that really hadn't come to light yet. So he brought this psychic into the Freetown State Forest to investigate the James Cater case. And she started freaking out and said, I see evil, I see devil worshipping, I don't want to be here, get me out of here. And Alan was like, what is this woman talking about? And wouldn't you know it, shortly after that, in the late 70s, they started to see a lot of evidence of that kind of stuff. So that medium saw it before anybody else did. I just thought that was one of the psychic stories.
No,
that,
it's
we don't
very
actually talk about that in the film, but it is a story that we came across.
It is interesting, and I should say around that time, 80s, even early 90s, there were a lot of like serial killers in the area, like the New Bedford highway killings.
The highway killings.
Everything. It was really popular back then in this area.
For whatever reason,
I don't know.
Then there's a lot of confusion amongst there are three cases in particular. There is the Carl Drew Robin Murphy Fall River cult, who was known to, well, said to have practiced a lot of their activity in the Freetown State Forest and in Fall River. There's the James Cater case with Mary Lou Arruda. Now that is often confused with the satanic crimes of the Fall River cult because the defense for James Cater attempted to pin Mary Lou Arruda's murder on a satanic cult because some of that activity was later found in the area where her body was found. The other case is the highway killings, which took place in the late 80s, early 90s, where was either 11 or 13 dead prostitutes
Right.
turned up on the major highways in the area. And those 3 cases are all separate from one another, but people that aren't from the area and are
They
not
blend
that
them
familiar
all.
with
Yep.
it, they say, oh, James Cater was a
It's just
Satanist,
meshed
or,
together.
you know, there was a cult that was killing
Usually,
prostitutes.
Carl Drew takes the blame for pretty much everything.
Yeah,
Yep.
and yeah, I mean, I guess we do have a clip from the Freetown State Forest portion of the film for the James Cater case. Maybe
Yeah,
this would be a good time
absolutely.
to jump into that.
Could you guys play that for us?
Nope, already on it.
Although satanic-related crimes and activity often dominate headlines relating to the Freetown State Forest, the area has also been associated with a number of isolated crimes, odd occurrences, and paranormal activity. In 1978, the remains of 15-year-old Raynham resident Mary Lou Arruda were found tied to a tree in the forest.
Mary Lou Arruda was on her bicycle on a dirt road in Raynham, and she was knocked off her bike and kidnapped, brought to the state forest in Freetown, and subsequently murdered. Her body was found 2 months later in November of '78 by 2 dirt bike riders. They said, we found a headless body tied to a tree. It was like a week after Halloween, so I figured it must be a dummy. And they brought me to the area. They wouldn't go near it. They pointed up there, and I walked up the hill, and sure enough, it was a headless body of a female tied to the tree.
Eventually, 32-year-old James Cater was tried and convicted of the kidnapping and murder. The death of Mary Lou Arruda is often confused with crimes committed by the Fall River satanic cult.
Although the James Cater case, Mary Lou Arruda case had absolutely nothing to do with a satanic crime, unfortunately her body was found near some of that activity.
His defense attorney basically put forth the theory that a cult had killed Arruda and not him. This kind of led to an attaching that he was perhaps involved with a cult, and that's what happened.
I had to testify in that case and say, in my opinion, it had nothing to do with that. He appealed it several times, got 3 or 4 trials, but he's still doing life in prison for that crime.
He doesn't look 32.
Yeah, and those were...
That's a rough 32 right there.
Yeah, I thought the same exact thing when I saw those photos.
You know?
I was sitting here thinking, what is she going to say? Because you have that face on, and that's what you come up with.
Yeah, that's when they said 32.
Not
and
how
looking,
gruesome that was, but,
it's
yeah.
absolutely gruesome,
Yeah.
but at the same time, maybe that goes to show the type of lifestyle that he had growing up, and that's why he looked so awful and weathered, you know?
You never know.
Well, he had done time for a previous crime similar in
Oh.
nature. He had abducted another young girl and tied her to a tree, and she managed to escape. So he was arrested and imprisoned for that, and when he got out, he got a job working as like a manager at like a Dunkin' Donuts or something like that. And then he committed the same crime again. And he's still in jail, and actually now he's in California in prison. Somehow, for some reason, they shipped him out there.
It's a good idea. It's a pretty good idea. So while we're on the subject of the Freetown State Forest, after, and you said it's 3 years in the making, a lot of it does have to, do with the Freetown State Forest. I'm not sure if you've read Christopher Balzano's books.
Doc Woods
Doc Woods.
is my favorite of his, actually. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about the forest? What do you think attracts all of this to just one location?
Well, if you talk to paranormal enthusiasts, they'll say it's the negative energy of the Bridgewater Triangle that draws people into the Freetown State Forest. Whereas I am more scientific and more of a skeptic, so if you look at the location of the Freetown State Forest, it's very close in proximity to New Bedford, 100,000 people, Fall River, 100,000 people, Providence, over 100,000 people, and even Boston is only 50 minutes to the north if you got no traffic.
Right.
So you got a lot of major cities, and then you have this location, which is a very remote piece of woodlands that is relatively easily accessible from these locations, and the Freetown State Forest is carved up by a bunch of different old logging roads and dirt roads and things. So if you got a pickup truck or an SUV, you can very easily get from point A to point B within the forest and not see another car along the way. So it's a, if you're going to kill somebody, what better place to dump the body than the Freetown State Forest?
It's a dumping ground.
But it does also have that history of cult activity. And one of the things I like to say when talking about that aspect of it is a lot of that stuff was going on during a time in this country which was called the Satanic Panic, back in the 80s especially, where a lot of crimes across the nation were being blamed on these satanic cults that were like taking over the country, and it was like this grand conspiracy. But if you research Satanism as a religion, especially LaVeyan Satanism, he was the founder of the first church, the Satanic Church, or the Church of Satan, it's an atheistic religion. There is no, they don't believe in Satan as a deity, or they don't believe in the existence of God or anything. It's kind of a mindset more so than anything else, and they picked Satan because he's viewed as the adversary and the opposite of Christianity. Not to them, they don't see it in an evil context. They just are anti-religion, anti-Christian, so they pulled in something that they thought that would basically sell their religion.
Right.
But it's like I said, it's an atheistic religion. They don't condone human sacrifice. They don't condone animal sacrifice. If you listen to interviews with their high priest, Peter H. Gilmore, it's not based on those kind of things. So when we talk about this stuff in the Freetown State Forest, we're not attributing it to any specific satanic sect. And actually, we use the language self-stylized Satanists in the film because we're not trying to pin it on any one denomination.
Right.
You know, there are non-theistic Satanists who don't believe in an actual satanic deity, but then there are theistic Satanists who are more spiritual and believe in a theistic Satan. And they don't even, it's not even necessarily the Satan from the Bible. But that's just something I wanted to clear up before we go any further into it, because it's kind of a touchy subject.
It is, and I think that it goes along with religion in general.
Anything with religion.
Yeah, people just get really weird about whether, you know, you're this or you're that, you're Catholic or you're Christian. Those two, you know, butt heads all the time too. So it's definitely a weird subject.
Sure,
weird
absolutely.
is the best way to put that, probably.
I always try to stay away from it.
Yeah,
because a lot of
we
people
do.
ask questions in what we do. A lot of people ask us questions. And
So I was born and raised Catholic, but Catholic does not believe in what I do. So, you know, it's one of those things that's just safer to stay away from.
Exactly.
Like you're always taught, don't talk about religions or politics. So it's easier to stay away from. But it's, you know, people have this, it's almost like a taboo about, you know, Satanism or, you know, satanic cults and what they do. And even like certain, if you look back at like cultures, back when, you know, like native cultures and stuff like that, they sacrificed, they did all these things. You know, they didn't believe in Satanism, but people were doing it long before it was even, you know, thrown out there as something evil or...
So when you went into the Freetown State Forest, you didn't pick up on any...
No, and actually the last, from our research, the last time any evidence of any kind of satanic activity was discovered there was back in 1999, where a dozen baby calves were butchered in the Freetown State Forest near the Dartmouth side of the forest, and we actually talk about that in the film. But that's the last piece of evidence I think that's been discovered in that ballpark, you know, in terms of the satanic stuff in the Freetown State Forest. Now, there's been other things that have happened since then. A couple of guys were found shot to death off of Bell Rock Road. There was an escaped emu running around in the forest for a while. There's been a lot of dogs abandoned there, and you know, it's still up and even into the 2000s there was a lot of weird stuff happening in the Freetown State Forest. But in terms of satanic stuff, that kind of died before the turn of the millennium.
So I think what Tiff was trying to get at is you can walk into the forest without even looking over your shoulder. Just didn't freak you out at all being out there in the middle of the night?
No, you know, actually my wife and I have taken our 9-month-old daughter hiking through the Freetown State Forest with the dog and all that.
It's a beautiful place. It's just too bad that it has a really bad reputation of creepy stuff.
It does, and there's actually a newspaper article that came out years back in the Standard Times called "Can't See the Forest for the Deeds," and it's actually a whole article about how it's a fun place for families now, and you can do picnicking, and they got the wading pool for the babies and all that kind of stuff, and they're trying to rebuild the forest reputation, which you know. Prior to that was a lot of people hear Freetown State Forest and they say there's no way I'm going in there. You know.
I just feel like with any forest there's always some sort of odd story, or whether a murder happened, or I don't know if going so far as a satanic cult or not, but every forest has a story or an urban legend, you know, to go along with it. So overall, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like you said, it's good to preserve the forest and have people actually go and enjoy it and just accept it for what it is.
But yeah, you're right. In the Freetown State Forest especially, it just has so many legends attached to it. You got the true crime stuff, you got Pukwudgie sightings, you got ghost sightings, you got true crime. It's just a banquet of a buffet of different things at the Freetown State Forest.
It definitely is, and it's unfortunate because it makes people that grew up in the area kind of stay away, or where we should be going there to like enjoy ourselves. Or the ledge is beautiful, and
I've never been. I still have to go.
And people don't even want to go because there's been so many stories of like suicides or killings, and it's. I mean, I have to say, it doesn't make me want to walk in there. I can't stand it, but I tell people all the time, I'm more afraid of the living than the dead. Ghosts I can handle, that's fine, but I'm afraid of like, people that are in there, or like coyotes or, large animals.
The thing is too, and this is one of my issues with the paranormal as a field, if you're walking into a location and somebody has told you that that location's haunted, or if you walk into a location and somebody has told you, there's been Bigfoot sightings here or whatever, you're going to walk in with that preconceived notion.
Right. Yep.
So then it's almost a placebo effect of, any little thing that you hear in the woods or any kind of, weird vibe that you get, you're going to attribute it to the paranormal, or maybe it's the Bigfoot behind the trees over there or whatever. Whereas if you walked into that location with no preconceived notions, you might never feel that way. So that's one of my things with the paranormal. It's like if people are going into these locations with a preconceived notion and they're saying, you hear a lot of times people say, oh, it's a very uneasy feeling when you walk in. It's like, well, of course there is, because you went in there knowing that there was the place has a reputation for being haunted.
Yep.
So of course you're going to walk in there with the hair standing up on your arms or whatever. People say you walk into the Lizzie Borden house and you just get this feeling. It's like, well, yeah, because two people were brutally murdered there. That's why you get that feeling. You know what I mean?
It's
funny.
That's
why we love to do what we do, because we work a lot with Andrew Lake, Matt Manise, Spooky South Coast.
Both featured in the film.
And they actually, Matt's a scientist, so his background, even though he's worked very closely with the paranormal for the past 30 years, he always comes from a scientific background. So. And he's definitely one of those people that you have to convince of your abilities. He did not believe ahead of time, and they decided that they were going to take us out to different places. And I would go with Matt, Tiffany would go with Andy, or vice versa. And they'd take us into a place. We'd meet at a central location. They'd drive us there. We had no idea what was going on. Some places had activity, some did not. And they'd take one to the house at once, and then we wouldn't be able to talk to each other. And then the second one in, and they'd compare notes at the end. It's almost like a little mini science experiment. But so there was no preconceived anything. We knew nothing about the locations. We didn't even know where we were going. And I'm not from Rhode Island, so they'd take us to like Rhode Island, and I had no idea where I was going. At one point, I realized I was on the Connecticut border, and I had no idea where I was, but they didn't tell us till afterwards. But something like that, coming from my skeptical background, I loved, because to hear that everything that I came up with was historically documented, or matched what Tiffany said, or Tiffany's stuff had matched what I said, and homeowners, having the same experiences, or even like if it was a historical society, if it was a museum, things like that. So I love to do things that way, because it's almost like you don't have that background. You have no idea what's going on. And if I tell people all the time, don't tell me where I'm going, don't tell me what's in here, because it breaks down my own credibility to myself. It's like, if I say it, it doesn't feel right.
The human mind is a very powerful thing.
It absolutely is.
And if you go in with a preconceived notion about a location, your mind can just run away with you.
Absolutely.
We always say too, because I work a lot with the Duxbury Historical Society, and they'll say, oh, we have a place for you. So we'll meet at a neutral location, and then I hop in their car and they just bring me. And that they have a field day with me, because it's piecing it all together and putting that emotional side to the factual side. And it's people that are historians that have put their blood, sweat, and tears into preserving a location. They actually have that validation or that comfort knowing that it is being recognized and appreciated.
We've been to some pretty interesting places.
Yeah.
Very interesting places. But it's kind of like, I got in the car one time, and I drove, it was like, say like 45 minutes into Boston, and they took me to the Ritz-Carlton. And the head of security met me at the door and said, okay, I need you to come with me. And I'm like, what is going on? What is this? But it's, people that even, the reputation that the Ritz has still needed answers for something. And like, okay, sure, I can help you. I'm walking by, Kirstie Alley's sitting at the bar, the whole New York Rangers team is to my right, Rob Gronkowski's there with his family, and I'm just like, this is kind of weird. Like, this is interesting. I'm more interested in what's going on down here. Do I have to go upstairs? But I like to do things that way, so that way you can't ever tell me that I knew everything ahead of time, or I knew what was going on ahead of time. But I think the problem with a lot of paranormal is, so many things are written about, and people end up what we call legend tripping. You go to this location because you've read about it, and they already know the stories, they already know the accounts of what have happened, and they go, oh, I had the same thing happen to me. How do you know? You know, like, would it have happened to you if you didn't know ahead of time?
Sure.
And that's when the scratching, the biting, the bruises,
Exactly.
and all that stuff happens, and it ends up being way more dramatic than it needs to be. So we have problems with the paranormal too.
So
definitely.
So now, getting back to the documentary,
Sure.
do you think that there would be something like a continuation? Do you think there would be a Bridgewater Triangle Part 2 or second half?
Yeah, there's no way that, I mean, even for an hour and a half,
Right.
if we were to make a documentary that covered every story that came out of the Bridgewater Triangle, you're talking about
Days.
a multi-episode series, hours and hours. You know,
Yep.
I probably would be like, I don't know if you, back in the 70s, there was a documentary that I loved called The World at War that was done by the BBC. It covers the Second World War. And even that documentary, which is like 26 episodes, and they're an hour-long a piece, even that documentary barely scratches the surface of
Right.
World War II. So to do an entire piece and series on the Bridgewater Triangle like that would take a lot of work. But yeah, the interesting thing to answer your question is each topic within the Bridgewater Triangle could be a documentary by itself.
Right.
You could do a documentary just on the Hockomock Swamp. You could do a documentary just on the Freetown State Forest, just on the haunted happenings in Rehoboth, hauntings in East Bridgewater,
Right.
the geological aspects of it, like Dunning Rock, Profile Rock, all that stuff. So there are multiple directions that it could go. So I would not be opposed to, you know, maybe doing a sub-documentary on one of these topics.
I'm just feeling everything's going to be unleashed and people are going to want more, which is good for you.
Well, yeah, and the beauty is when this comes out on DVD and Blu-ray is stuff that didn't necessarily make the cut can be bonus features. So there will be a ton of bonus features for this film as well.
I do have to ask you, did you, when you're on the NIP, did you ever get to go onto the little island where supposedly there were little apes?
We didn't set foot on it, but we rode out by it.
You drove by it?
We
to
rode
look
out
for the
by
apes?
it. Yep, yeah, and that story's featured
To
in the
look
film
for
as
the
well.
apes.
Yeah, the little like orangutan type
Yes.
creatures.
Mhm.
Yep, and that island too. And this is like more urban legend than anything else. They say it will disappear and appear in a different part of the lake.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so those are the kind of stories that come out of Lake Nippendicket.
It's definitely interesting though, because it makes you wonder, where did these stories originate? Like, how did
Yeah.
how did somebody come
Right.
up with it?
And that, you know, that's what's
Right.
fun about the Bridgewater Triangle too. There are those stories in there that are more lend themselves more to urban legend maybe than actual fact, like the red-headed hitchhiker Route 44.
Yeah.
Although there are a number of eyewitness accounts featured in New England Ghost Files by Charles Turk Robinson that claim that people actually have seen this red-headed hitchhiker.
Right.
But then there's also this lesser-known legend of the mad trucker of Copacut Road out in the Freetown State Forest that we talk about too, and that kind of lends itself more to urban legend. But it's fun to talk about those things anyway. And
I've
those are
always
two
loved
topics that
urban
we cover in the film. The mad trucker very briefly, but we do talk about it.
See, and I think this is great to get everybody together, especially before Halloween, because everybody
Right.
likes to get a little spooked. So I think it'd be great.
That's why we picked this time of year because you're always going to have the paranormal people.
Right.
No matter what, they're always going to be interested. They'd go see this on November 2nd.
Right.
You know, where everybody else is moved on to Thanksgiving and Christmas. But the general public's interest in this kind of thing peaks this time of year. So we were like, if we're going to premiere it, it's got to be in October because we want the general public's interest.
So now, where are you premiering it?
It will premiere Sunday, October 20th at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, in their main auditorium. The event runs from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., but the film itself runs from 2 to 3:30. So there'll be an hour meet and greet before the film so that people can come in. You can meet the people that were in the film. A lot of them wrote books, so they'll be signing and selling books out in the lobby. Spooky South Coast is going to be doing a remote show from there, not on the radio, but they're going to be interviewing different people that were involved in the project. Lauren Coleman will be there and will say a few words before the film starts. And then after the film, there'll be a question and answer segment with the filmmakers and the cast and take questions from everybody. And I'm sure there'll be press there, and students from the university will be there. So it's shaping up to be a very exciting
I'm excited.
event.
I can't wait to see it in its full glory.
It's full glory. It's definitely going to be interesting, and I can definitely say I would sit down in front of my TV every night, every Sunday night or whatever, and watch a small, mini series or even a full season of what you can come up with something like this. Because
a marathon. You need to create a marathon.
A marathon. Originally, when I thought about it, I thought maybe it should be in a multi-episode series. But we'll see what happens.
You
with
never
this.
know.
You never know.
The good thing about this is it's never going to die down, and more things are going to happen because of the area. It's just new things happen all the time, and it's definitely going to give you more material to work with. So
I think it's a fascinating topic, so I would not be opposed to
I'm
that.
so excited.
Right.
I can say where tickets are available, right?
Yeah,
All right. Tickets are available at thebridgewatertriangledocumentary.com, and we do have a live streaming option available for this program because we're getting a lot of requests from people outside of the area that can't make a drive to go to this film. So the night of the premiere, you can get a live streaming ticket. So we're going to have a cameraman on site. So you will see from the comfort of your own home in front of your computer, you'll see exactly what people in the theater are seeing.
Ooh. That's awesome.
So you get to see Lauren Coleman speak before the film starts. And then when the film actually starts, you're not watching somebody videotaping a screen. The signal switches to a split from what the people in the theater are seeing on screen. So you get like a nice, clean...
Like a bootleg.
But you're not watching someone filming a screen. You're actually watching an actual signal of the movie. So you get to see the movie, and then it goes back to the cameraman after the movie. Then you get to watch the question and answer panel.
That's awesome.
So that's a neat option that we're offering.
You guys have to make it out there. I mean, it's Sunday, October 20th. You're going to be able to meet, I mean, we always talk about Jeff Belanger on the show. We always name drop him because we do a lot of work with him. Tim Weisberg.
Andrew Lake, Matt Meese.
Jeff won't actually be there. He's doing a lecture, but Lauren Coleman will be there. Tim Weisberg, John Brightman, Alan Alves, Lou Angeli from Whaling City Ghosts, Andrew Lake, Christopher Pittman, all those guys will be there.
That's awesome.
So it's definitely worth it.
Yes.
For the price of what you would pay to go to the movies, you can come see this event plus all the other festivities associated with it.
And bring extra for books.
Right. It's like 2 Dunkin' Donuts coffees, pretty much.
There you go. Well, we're going to wrap up our show for tonight, so thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hopefully we'll have you on again in the future with your new ideas and documentaries.
Again, how can people get in touch with you?
You go to the website, thebridgewatertriangledocumentary.com. My email's up there, and my cell phone number is 508-264-3578. That's on the website as well. So.
Okay, as long as it's on the website, I'm like, he's doing it.
Plenty of mystery callers.
No, I don't mind getting phone calls. That's what I'm here for. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us,
Thanks for having me.
We will be back next week.
Next week.
All right.